how to become what we already are. The great paradox on this so-called spiritual journey. How can we become that which we already are? Pretty much everyone on this journey when the quest for our true nature through grace or suffering, which is essentially the same, looks for our true nature, or simply peace, contentment, happiness, harmony. Pretty much everyone in this human form starts looking from the perspective of that human form, from the perspective of a separate person, a me, a personal me that is looking for something that I apparently don't have. Many of us may have tried to find that peace, that happiness, that harmony. Through a career, through approaching beautiful things, a relationship. We look, most of us, for that happiness in the phenomenal world, in the appearances of this world that at that time appear as something outside of me. I am deeply conditioned to be a solid me in this body. Somehow I'm stuck in here and others are stuck in their body. And from that perspective, through grace or suffering, I start looking for something beyond things, beyond phenomenal experience, beyond objective experience. Looking for happiness, mostly disappointed from the fleeting experience of the happiness from things or from an apparent partner outside of me that is supposed to fulfill me, to make me whole. We set up on the quest we may heard somewhere in the East of something like enlightenment, or in religious terms we may seek for God, awakening, liberation, the peace that passes understanding, whatever we call it. Usually there is a me looking for something that is to be found outside of me, and the mind usually thinks it's something that I can achieve in the future. Being in that, there's no problem with that. Being in that confusion, in that not knowing, most of us start from that perspective. I am a person, and the things of the world somehow have not brought, knowingly or not knowingly, what I know deep down in my heart, what I'm looking for. So we could say start our spiritual life. These are, of course, all just words and never can express fully the truth. The word spirituality is a bit also tainted by now, but simply meaning we look for some spirit, something that is beyond things, beyond phenomena that I can experience with my mind. And almost all of us begin that spiritual life from the belief to be a separate me. That can become free, become enlightened, become awakened. And in concession to this perspective, to that starting point, apparent starting point of the spiritual journey, many traditions have created spiritual practices. Practices for that apparent me that progressively can lead me to that awakening, to that enlightenment, to that freedom. We refer to that, or it is referred to that often as the progressive path. A progressive path for a person that is moving through practice into different stages of consciousness, it's sometimes said. And that is a very valid perspective. I do not dismiss that because it seems like that. What we have to understand, though, is that these practices, be they yoga or meditation or japa recitation or prayers, special techniques to move energy in my chakras, in my energy body, Kriya Yoga. All of those practices and techniques are not for my being, not for myself. They are for my body. They are for my mind. They are preparational practices to help me to grasp that open secret that I am already that what I am seeking. So many that come to this so-called non-dual teachings, satsang, come from a spiritual journey and have practiced mindfulness, meditation, yoga, the Course in Miracles, many beautiful ways to support the body-mind to be receptive, open to the simple truth that I am already that. So this progressive path, also sometimes called the indirect path, is a very valid path to prepare the body and the mind. But it can never make us become or bring us to the destination where we already are happily waiting for all of us to arrive. Like Rupert always says, stand up and make a step towards yourself. Where would you go? Wherever we go apparently away from ourselves. We are already here and now. So that's why these teachings always sound to the mind, to a certain degree, very paradoxical. We are and we are not. We're there and we're not. We are what we are and somehow we're not. Here, in these meetings, we focus mainly on what is called the direct path. We go directly, like last week, to this silent presence, to that beingness that we are. And all of our preparation through life, or maybe even past life or practices, enables us to come together in this intimate group and already enjoying that perfume of our shared being. We don't need to practice Kriya Yoga for 4 hours to come into that recognition, that remembrance of our fragrance of being. So the direct path has a different approach. It starts from where we are. It starts at the destination. We go directly home. It's like in Monopoly, when we get this card, go straight to prison, don't collect $4,000. We just go straight. And being home through this coming together, as I mentioned, Jesus coming together, and I am there, we are there, our shared beingness is there. For the mind, it's very hard to grasp that just sitting in that fragrance, in this perfume, is enough, can be enough to dismantle the lifelong learned ignorance, confusion of me being a separate person. Ramana Maharshi called it abiding as the self. I refer to that mostly as resting in being. Is that a practice? Are we doing anything? No. We're just resting to be able to rest deeply like that might have required preparation. But once the door opens through the presence of a group or a teacher or a book or a deep insight, there is nothing left to do, to practice. In Dzogchen Buddhism, it's called Rigpa, this knowingly knowing of myself, being aware of being aware. In Dzogchen Buddhism, all the practices lead to that initiation. The teacher initiates the student into Rigpa, and the glimpse, that eternal glimpse of the recognition, the remembrance of, oh man, oh. And then on this direct path, which is not a path, we can just rest here together in that beingness. It's like when we grow up and we start being referred to our name by our parents, by society, like, oh, Adrian here, oh, me, and then comes the mirror, and it's like, oh, me, And then this innocence of Adrian, which is the pure expression of I am, becomes conditioned with all that stuff on top of the name. And every time I look in the mirror, I get confirmations like, oh, this is who I am. And it becomes more and more and more solid. This idea of me being this body, being in that body, being that mind. So I learn from childhood into my teenage years deeply that I am that which I look at in the mirror. The direct path, resting in being, abiding as the self, is looking at a different mirror. It's looking at a formless mirror, at the invisible mirror, where the light of our shared being, of my awareness, is mirrored back to me. It is this experience of presence, this fragrance. It's like looking in the mirror and seeing my true face. In Zen, there is this expression, what did your face look like before you were born? That's what we look at here. We're looking at our true face, looking, in parenthesis, the true looking with our inner eyes of consciousness. And simply by that looking into the true mirror of our being, of ourself, we decondition, deconstruct the solidity, the belief system of being a separate me in this body, in this head. It is so simple. We rest, and if we want to call it a practice, it doesn't matter, it's just a word. If resting and being, looking into that mirror of our true self, if we practice that, resting in being, paradoxically, over time, because the body and mind is conditioned in time. Over time, the resting in being impregnates my whole being, informs my whole being, my body, my mind, my feelings, my emotions, my perceptions, until resting in being becomes resting as being. The duality of me resting in this light, of my own light, in this awareness, dismantles the construction of a separate self to such a deep degree that eventually even that reflection of the light in my mind, in my subtle body, that presence, that fragrance is not even needed anymore, and I am remembering deeply again that I am that even without looking into the mirror. Even without that presence, that reflection, that's what I call sometimes establishing myself in myself. It all sounds a bit paradoxical, I know, because I am that. But to know that deeply at any time in my life, while I'm experiencing this human experience, to know this so deeply, to understand this so deeply, that I don't need confirmation anymore to look in the mirror. It's like when we grow up. When we become a teenager, we may become so obsessed looking in the mirror. It's like, the puberty comes and it's like my identity gets really strengthened and like, yes, look, that's me. Oh, you're beautiful, or you're ugly, or whatever. In the same way, eventually, that teenager, we don't need to look in the mirror anymore to know that I am that body mind. It becomes so deep, this knowledge, this ignorant, confused knowledge to be this body mind, that we don't even need to look in the mirror anymore. In the same way, on the direct path, so to speak, at least how it is shared here, we can rest in our shared being, abiding as the self, as Ramana said, so deeply, so frequently, that eventually we don't even need to look in this formless mirror of our being anymore. We just are what we are. And the last subtle duality of me experiencing a state of presence, of light, of this fragrance of our beingness, even that eventually is not needed anymore, and I can be happy while I'm sad. I can be happy while I'm feeling tired or feeling sick, or while my avatar is going through a difficult time, myself, my untouched beingness is always available as my very self. But in this sharing that comes through me, because it's my own journey that how worked for me, what I'm sharing, it's a very valid approach, Ramana Maharshi's approach, through self-inquiry and understanding, which we engage in here, also through questions. We recognize, we get that glimpse of our shared being. And then all that there is to do, which is not a doing at all, just a relaxing, allowing, a welcoming, a being, I can establish myself back in myself through this resting in being, through this looking in the mirror, seeing my true formless face, pure beauty. And these meetings, in a way, one function of these meetings is to really enjoy this fragrance, this looking in the mirror together, to allow us to deconstruct, decondition this habit of looking in the mirror of the person, of the body-mind. And in that way, these meetings may help us to carry that into our life. So we can take this fragrance after the meetings. You may feel it stays for a while with us. And as more we rest in that, as easier is that pathway, which is not a pathway. This direct path to ourselves becomes more and more easy accessible to us. So we can just more and more, through self-inquiry or just through this remembrance, which is not in the mind, this memory that is in us, in consciousness, knowing that this is our true face, more and more, even without the question, who am I? Just this intention brings us back to this resting in being. So it becomes easier and easier to drop that ignorance, that confusion, to be this body, mind, person exclusively separate from other beings and the world. And in that sense, in my own journey, coming from yoga, Kriya yoga, meditation, I had a glimpse of all of that, a little of all of that. The habit of the person coming back to a practice, even studying yoga deeply after a deep recognition, this old habit of me as a person trying to establish something, to be that, to manifest that, to come to a goal, and then to help others to come to that goal, I remember very well. So even for me, this idea of the direct path was a bit vague. It's like, no, but I have to do something. There's no, I cannot just relax and be that. That is not enough. We're so deeply conditioned to work ourselves to a goal in our jobs, in our family, in our personality, in our bodies. We have learned that the only way to get there is by doing something, achieving something, practicing something. So we may alternate for a while between this understanding, this deeply knowing, and we use some support that has helped us. If it's still needed, we might practice mindfulness, we might practice meditation, we might practice yoga if it helps us to support the receptiveness, the openness of the body-mind. That's all welcomed. But this practice can never bring us home, because we are home. So when we speak about the progressive and the direct path, it has to be clearly to us that the one is looking from the perspective where most of us start, from our apparent separateness, from the idea, the belief to be a separate person. And from that perspective, it's very valid to move in stages progressively towards a goal, because we are so identified in being a mind. And the mind functions in time, in stages, so that how it looks like. But from the perspective of being, from consciousness, which essentially is the only true perspective, the only real perspective. From the perspective of consciousness, we are here now. And from the perspective of consciousness, there is nothing other than consciousness. Like I like to say, everything is God, but without God, everything is nothing. Everything is God from the perspective of consciousness. It is already whole, it is already complete, it is all perfect, as Maharaji used to say to Ram Dass. So if someone experiences life and shares this unshareable perspective to the person that is listening, due to the deep conditioning to look from the perspective of a separate me, it's not possible. It cannot be. I have to know, what are you talking about? I have to, I'm not that. I'm still feeling separate. I'm still, I'm not there yet. I really need to do something to get there. And that is all fine. The only danger is every time I take the perspective of a separate me and I invest in that perspective, I invest in the separate me. I invest in the old habit of being a separate me. And I crystallize and I condition myself as a separate me. So I may sit 1, 2, 5, 8 hours in meditation a day, but if the rest of the time of my life I keep believing and investing in the perspective of a separate me, it overrides so to speak, my deeper inner knowing that I'm already home, that I'm already one with everything. And this is why we emphasize strongly in this approach on understanding. Through understanding, through dismantling knots of ignorance, doubts about myself being infinite and eternal, doubts of my consciousness being your consciousness, dismantling the doubt that, well, but I'm here and you are there. By dismantling all these apparent beliefs of me, of a separate me, with this understanding, without needing to practice anything in my daily life, I can apply in any given moment this understanding of what I am in my work, in my relationships, when I go shopping, when I'm at the cashier and people are coming behind and I'm getting maybe stressed to put my veggies into the bag. In any moment I can remember, wait, this is just a old perspective of a separate me apparently experiencing itself separate from other people, apparently seeing things that are not there. That which is here in this fragrance, enriched with deep understanding, is enough to remember what we are and to live as what we are. And living as we are is the embodiment of what we are. The spiritualization, sometimes it is referred to, of our being into our life, into our body, into our mind, into our relationship, into the world. We go directly to what we are and allow that to inform that which is apparently not what we are. This is simplicity. The simple fact of truly deeply understanding what I am and living in that simple truth. and living in that simple truth and looking from that perspective upon my fellow friends is love. Truth, love, and simplicity. Yes, the habit, the lifelong habit, lifelong learned habit of me being a separate me can be a very strong force that tries to pull me back into that perspective over and over again. But once we truly deeply know through the silence and the dismantling of confusion in understanding, which is silence, all we have to do is to come back to that understanding, to that perspective, and to rest in that, and to move from that, and to speak from that, and to act from that. And our whole life becomes our spiritual practice. But we're not practicing anything. The seeker is a version of the contracted consciousness, the contracted person. The impulse of seeking comes out of the openness, out of consciousness. And it meets a apparent separate contracted person that is so accustomed to work itself towards a goal that it confuses this light of consciousness that comes as that seeking for truth, for love, for enlightenment, with this contracted person, and that contracted person starts its progressive path towards freedom and enlightenment. But eventually we can see that everything that apparent separate self is trying to do to get somewhere is again a version of that contraction of consciousness, again a perpetuation of the idea of a separate me that is not there yet. Oh. The mind is deeply conditioned into the belief that more is more. As more I do, as more I get. And this approach is carried into the seeking, into the spiritual life. As more I practice, as more I meditate, as more I practice Kriya Yoga and move energy, and as faster I will get there. However, eventually we land in a group like ours, where we are telling to ourselves, less is more. We remind ourselves, because we are just speaking is not a separate me, but our shared being, reminding us, Kokma, you are already home. Take it easy, relax. And that relaxation, that openness, that welcoming attitude of our shared being, of awareness, most importantly, just needs to be understood, experienced, that this is what we are. And yes, if the body-mind rebels dramatically and feels very dense or is very loaded with the heaviness of thought and life, then yes, we might take that satsang, that YouTube, that meditation, that hatha yoga, yeah, all welcomed. We might use those tools to help us to be more receptive, more open, more relaxed in our body mind, to have a support to open that apparent door in our hearts from the perspective of our humanness. So it's easier to walk through and see again, oh, there is no door, no window. There's just me playing to be not me, and me playing to be a bird, and me playing to be a wave, and me playing to be human, me playing to be the fragrance of a flower. As long as there is remnants of this identification of being a separate me, there is a door in our hearts that we apparently have to walk through. So we can do whatever supports us individually, many different ways to support the body-mind. But without the understanding that I am already what I'm seeking, I am in great danger to keep repeating the old habit for looking of myself in something, in someone, or in some time. And the promise of most progressive paths, of a big bang event, an enlightenment event that's going to break me free from all my conditioning, all of my habit to confuse myself, all of my habit to lose myself in some psychological state. This promise of the big bang enlightenment of the progressive path turns out for the very, very majority of humans to be just a fantasy. Because any Big Bang experience, and there are beautiful Big Bang experiences for our body minds, and they are very wonderful to receive and grace. But they all have a beginning and an end. The most beautiful Nirvikalpa Samadhi will come to a closure. And there we are, back apparently in this body-mind. And now what? Back to practice. Back to the practice to get into the next Samadhi. And so on. I met great yogis like that. Samadhi junkies. That's very fine also. All of them are very enjoyable. But this lasting peace, happiness, in my experience, comes through this deep understanding. And that is not a big bang experience. It's very ordinary. It is this silence, or the silence that comes in understanding through words, through unknotting the confusion. And this understanding lasts and is always available to me to use when I need it, when the confusion of the separate self sneaks back into my consciousness. Hello, hello, I feel so separate. Oh, okay, welcome. I don't need to samadhi you away. I don't need to meditate you away. It's like, welcome, little separate me. Come, you are welcomed in the container of what we are in consciousness. And in time, you will dissolve in this love and this understanding. We love you, separate me. Come here, sit next to me. Let's enjoy this crazy dream together. And this, for some of us, might be a big disappointment, what I'm sharing, because very most traditions are based on that enlightenment experience, samadhi, happy after. But now we are living in such a beautiful, amazing time in this dream that these samadhis are given to us freely. Where we maybe had to practice yoga for 30 years and pranayams and God knows what to get to that glimpse. Now it's just showering up on us. So it's a bit silly to keep going with these old ways while it's all so available, and we just have to get out of the way and allow that light of our being to do the work for us. I remember very well, it's such a strong habit. You see, I know it's such a strong habit. My journey in the very early years, I practiced Kriya Yoga, very powerful techniques to manipulate the body, mind, the chakras, the energy system. And I gained some beautiful experiences through that. And once I went, when I was still struggling very much physically, emotionally, mentally, when I've been still a body-mind mess, we could say, I went to a 3 months Kriya Yoga retreat, and I got such great benefits for my body-mind, for my health, that 5 years later or so, I felt, oh, I need to go back to this retreat, and I'm still not complete, and I'm still not whole, and I'm gonna find something. This deep habit was still coming back, so let's go back and become even more pure, more enlightened, more free, whatever. God knows what I was thinking. So I went back, and there is like a 5 weeks preparational hatha yoga cleanse, body cleanse, digestive system cleanse. Wonderful, very recommended. Classical hatha yoga to purify the body mind. But after 5 weeks, we started with the Kriya Yoga. And in the very first session, I was like, oh my God, what the am I doing here? What the heck? And I had this deep, deep insight that whatever I continue doing at this point is just getting in the way for what is already happening naturally. And I left the retreat, even I paid for it. And on my way out, I made friends with one guy from Wales. That was very hard to understand, I remember. And he recommended, I told him what I experienced, and he recommended me that book from Brother Lawrence. It's a Christian monk. And this little book I bought after is exactly that. It's like, once we come to that recognition authentically within ourselves. Once we remember, and this light of consciousness is shining upon our body minds, that's all what we need. In his Christian terminology, he spoke about the light of God. He was such a simple monk. Everyone was doing all these recitations and this and la 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 and all these practices in the monastery, and he had to do them as well. But every time he had a moment for himself, he was just resting and allowing that light of God to do the work for him. So that was the point in time in my own journey, if I may share that here, where all practices became irrelevant to me. So now I can share that. Of course, there was a time where they were very relevant to me and I would have defended them probably big time. But once we see, we cannot unsee. So paradoxically, having been a yogi and a Kriya yogi, I'm sharing now the direct path. And I'm sharing with you the magic of silence. With or without words, because that has been very much my path too. The magic, the power of that silence, of that understanding that just makes this old habit, that sticky me, fall back into the ocean of consciousness naturally. And I have been blessed to come across teachers that are so dear in my heart, that have been deeply established, as I always say, in that understanding, in that knowing, and that presence, which is our shared presence through them, has helped me to remember and recognize and rest in that. So the teaching over all of those years of not being a teacher has evolved from complicated techniques and practices and approaches to this simplicity of being. and being together in as that, being together in that love, as I shared lately in the group on Signal, this unconditional love being in that as that together when it's pure and the intention is pure is more than enough to be what we are and to remember to live as that we are. And if we deeply are that which we are and we share, like you all do with your friends, with your family, maybe even in your job, when we are what we are knowingly, everything that we have practiced, that we have learned, that we have done, is in that knowing of what we are and is available to those around us. Magic. We don't even have to address it anymore. We don't have to practice it anymore. We don't have to even speak specifically about certain things. Just the very embodiment of our knowing of what we are and all that was experienced in our souls is in the open for others to receive, to take. And that's our all role in this dream and this transition of this dream, this powerful transition that we are in now. Because this little intimate group, I can feel who am I gonna tell who or what you are, you all know. So let's go out and live that and share that and celebrate that. And support this transition into that which we already carry in our hearts, that remembrance in our hearts, how the world could look like, the harmony that is available to this dream. We carry the blueprint of it. And sometimes maybe when this old habit of, oh, I'm not there, I forgot, I don't have it, or something comes back, we can remember, what did I do the last time to be happy? What did I do the last time to become that peace? Was there a separate me doing something actively to find myself in this rest, in this relaxed, effortless beingness? Did I even remember that I'm happy when I was truly happy, or was I just happy? Did it not just came to me through this understanding, through this remembrance? I found myself just without problems, just living life, just happily living and sharing this happiness. Did I do anything to become that, or was it just there? And in contrary, didn't I do something to become unhappy again? Didn't I contract again and started to think and feel on behalf of an apparent separate me that is lacking something, that is missing something, that needs something more to achieve, to become? Where was the doing? And who was the doer? And we may see that the true remembering, recognition is a letting go, a sinking back into non-doing, into being, instead of a trying to achieve something. It's like a falling back into what I already am. And as deeper the understanding of what I am is there, and as more we have looked into that face, into our true formless face, into that mirror of being, as easier it becomes to let go, to stop doing, to pretend to be a separate person. And we can just relax and trust that all that needs to be done will be done, and all that needs to be shared will be shared. And all that doesn't need to be done and shared won't be done and shared, and we can keep relaxing and stop wasting our time with nonsense. Just to keep this apparent separate self busy with the activity of creating a separate me. And we find ourselves in this relaxed beingness that has so much time to be happy. So I hope this distinction between the two apparent different paths, progressive and direct, became a bit clearer today. And if there are any questions, you're very welcome now to ask or to share. Or we just enjoy a little bit more this love of our shared being before we say bye for now. It always reminds me, we may all know these yogi teas with these little messages. Once I had a yogi tea and was saying, where there is love, there is no more questions. Somehow that seems what is happening here. And that is very welcome. Just as questions and comments are welcome. Hmm. So may we all carry that perfume of silence, as Francis Lucille calls it, into our Sunday, into our life, into our relationships, into our work. So we all can recognize each other through each other, our true face of love. And God willing, we may meet again next Sunday. We'll be here. You're welcome to join. Mm. Mm.